Hey there, my name is Rachael and welcome to the Magdala podcast. We at Magdala know from experience that pornography, masturbation, and other sexual addictions are not just a guy problem. The need for women to be accompanied in a journey towards healing from addiction has gone sorely unmet, and that's why we're here. Magdala exists as a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom alongside each other from sexual addiction. Our goal is to supply you with support, community, and accountability. Here on the podcast, you'll find everything from testimonies to practical advice to dialogue about how to heal and live fully as a Catholic woman. Wherever you are in your journey, know that you're not alone, and we welcome you to this table. Hello, everyone. Rachael here. I did a blog post this week called Lust or Desire on Magdala's website, and it received a lot of positive feedback, and so we thought it might be helpful this week to dive into it more deeply on a podcast episode. So it's just me today, no special guests, unfortunately, but I'd love to unpack this blog post for you, offer you a little bit more resources if you're struggling to distinguish between lust and sexual desire that's healthy in your life. But yeah, hopefully this proves to be a little bit more helpful to you than just a mere blog post. I started writing this blog post because a lot of the questions I get, especially as a married woman working in Magdala, is about sexual desire and is about having healthy sexual relationships with a spouse, or if you're dating or engaged, how to experience your sexuality in a way that isn't sinful. A lot of women who are in recovery are really afraid of sinning, and I totally understand that. I've experienced a similar fear myself at times, but I've found that fear doesn't end up being productive in our life of virtue unless it's a holy fear, like a filial fear, a fear of offending God. But when it comes to distinguishing between lust and desire, the first thing I want to say is that Padre Pio has this fantastic quote that I wasn't able to find online, but he says something along the lines of, anything that speaks to you with the narrative of your past, using your past as an explanation for why something will occur or why something will happen to you, anything that comes to you saying, because you've done X, Y, and Z, this will happen to you. Padre Pio says that is never the voice of God. He says it very concretely. That is never the voice of God, because God only speaks from redemption. So I want to say that initially. If you have any sort of fear or lie that is coming into your life as a result of past sin or present sin even, that because you were addicted to pornography or masturbation or other sexual compulsions, you will sin in a marriage, or any desire you experience in relationships is unhealthy, anything that speaks to you like that cannot be the voice of God, because God speaks from a perspective of redemption and healing and mercy. He convicts us. Remember, the Spirit convicts us, doesn't cause us shame. But practically speaking, distinguishing between lust and desire can come down to a few things I will discuss in this episode. First, I kind of want to counter as well the assumption that lust can be healthy. I've seen a few resources, particularly in the psychological world, which obviously has so many good resources, but we can't condense who we are to just our psychology. But there's a few resources out there that have said that lust, especially in marriage, can be healthy, that lusting after a spouse is necessary. And I just think that the church could never agree with a perspective like this, and nor do I think it's accurate. The Catechism says, and I quote this in the blog post, but the Catechism defines lust as disordered desire for or an inordinate enjoyment of sexual pleasure. So again, lust is disordered desire for or an inordinate, that's a hard word, an inordinate enjoyment of sexual pleasure. When we use this kind of language, when we see the clear language that the Catechism uses of there's an excess there or something inordinate or something disordered, that doesn't mean that the sacrament of marriage can make it ordered. It doesn't mean that marriage can make lust healthy. If it's disordered by nature, then that's not healthy. What can be healthy is sexual desire, and what is healthy, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Because especially in the sacrament of marriage, sexual desire has a holy role to play. But I think I think the biggest hang up that I find is that women immediately assume, and men as well, but women immediately assume that any thought in reference to sex or sexuality is just inherently wrong. Like if it comes to mind, it's wrong. Especially if we're talking about serious relationships here, like dating or engagement. And even in marriage, sometimes women still think that if you have a sexual thought about a man you're attracted to, that it's immediately wrong and you've committed the sin of lust. This isn't the case. So first, our thoughts are not sinful. It's our response to our thoughts that can be sinful, right? So a sexual image can come to mind without it being your fault. It could be a prompt of a memory. It could be a trigger of some pornographic content you've seen. Our brain, the makeup of our brain, like the neurobiology of our brain, puts things in our minds that are not out of our will, right? So when a sexual thought comes to mind, it's a mistake to think that that's immediately a sin, because we're not in complete control over our thoughts, which is unfortunate, or at least the thoughts that come into our mind. What we are in control of, what we can apply our will to, is how to respond to those thoughts. So if you are in a relationship with somebody and a sexual thought comes to mind or a sexual image comes to mind, if you respond to that thought by saying, thank you, God, for the gift of my sexuality, and I set this thought aside, and I ask you to purify my love for this person, you've actually committed an act of virtue. That's a virtuous act. Or if you're married and have a sexual thought about your spouse, and you say, wow, thank you, God, for this beautiful part of our life. Please purify my intentions towards my spouse, purify my love. Again, an act of virtue, because it is sinful to dwell on those thoughts, right? So if a sexual thought comes to mind, it's sinful to dwell on it, to fantasize, because then ultimately you're using a person or an image of that person as an object for your own pleasure, right? So that's when that disordered or inordinate enjoyment comes in. But that's not to say to enjoy sexual pleasure in itself in marriage is wrong, right? It's supposed to be enjoyable. God made it enjoyable. And especially in marriage, it can be a gift to the marriage to experience that together, always in the context of each other. And when you experience it together and ask for it to be further sanctified, it can be a gift and it can bring you closer together. But there's a few different ways that we can distinguish between lust and natural desire, right? And I'm going to go into those, but before I do that, I want to say, sometimes there's still a thought that sexual attraction just in itself is wrong, right? So, and that's a very hard thing, especially if you struggle with scrupulosity or deep shame. It's very hard to root that out, right? Also, if you hear a bird tweeting in the background, I apologize. There's a bird just saying, "Let me sing you the song of my people" outside my window right now, and he's just having the time of his life. So, welcome that bird. The bird is my special guest today. Anyway, if you struggle with scrupulosity or deep shame, it can be very easy to feel like sexual attraction is just wrong, right? But I want to make the point. Let's attack first principle. If something is disordered, if lust is disordered, that must mean it is disordering something ordered, right? Lust is disordered sexual desire or inordinate, right? So if it is disordered and inordinate by the definition of the church, right, that must mean that the thing it is distorting or disordering is ordered. So sexual attraction is ordered. It's part of our nature. It's natural, it's healthy, it's good even, and it can be sanctified. Grace builds upon nature, right, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. So all these things of our nature can be infused by grace, which is lovely to think about and very freeing, especially for somebody who's been an addict to a sexual compulsion. It's very freeing to think about grace coming into your sexuality, right? So practically speaking, distinguishing between lust and natural, even good sexual desire comes down to a few things. First, we can think about when it arises. So if you have an attraction that is coming randomly without much prompting, if it happens frequently, like let's say you're experiencing this with a lot of men and women, right? Pretty frequently. And when it comes, it feels overwhelming and distracting. You don't feel like you have much control over your thoughts. Like, things are kind of spinning out. And again, that frequency is something to look for. If you're consistently experiencing this overpowering sexual attraction to men or women, that can be a sign that perhaps lust is, has a bit more say in your life than you need. And so there's a few things to do with that we'll get into later. But when sexual desire arises, it typically comes like authentic, good, holy sexual desire. And attraction, when it arises, it sometimes, especially for women, comes as a result of an emotional connection, a mental connection, sharing an experience of joy or suffering, growth in knowledge and friendship with someone. So getting to know somebody better, especially in a committed relationship, it's natural when we have deeper emotional, mental, spiritual connections that we desire for a deeper physical connection, right? So if you notice that your sexual desire is coming out of a result of experiences and it's kind of this beautiful circular movement, that's good. That's healthy. That's your body working in accord with your mind and your spirit, right? So that's very congruent and very good. Again, we just have to ask for a purification of intentions and making sure that we stay in that good, natural, circular movement. But if you notice that that's when your deep desires are really arising, is in those moments of connection, that's beautiful and good, and you can call that good. Another aspect of distinguishing between lust and desire is, what is attraction focusing on? Okay, so is it a part of somebody's body or even just solely their physical appearance, right? So that overwhelming attraction comes to, it just is focusing on how a person looks. That is typically how lust takes form, right? It focuses on the person as an object. It focuses on the person as typically solely an exterior. So if you find yourself especially preoccupied with somebody's appearance or a part of their body, where it is distracting and it's not contributing to a perception of the whole person, that's lust showing its face. So that's when you know to kind of curb again and ask for the grace to purify your mind and your heart towards this person or towards these people who you're experiencing this towards, and try to curb that, right? But then if your sexual desire focuses on the whole person, including their physical appearance, including their physical appearance, right, as a part of their whole, we're not excluding physical appearance here. It's meant to be attractive, right? Especially between men and women. But if your perception of the person and your attraction to the person includes their physical exterior, but it's still this embodied whole, right? It's this embodied person. And you're experiencing a desire to be physically united with that whole person out of love for them, that is good and natural sexual desire, right? Particularly in serious relationships and in the sacrament of marriage. You should have a deep desire to be physically united with a person you love, right? So that's two of the aspects that we're looking at to distinguish between the two. And then the third is, what are we able to do with our thoughts? Like, where does it lead us, right? So we've covered, when does it arise? What is the attraction focusing on? And then where does it lead us? So do our thoughts immediately go to our own pleasure and satisfaction out of our attraction, right? They immediately go to the use of a person as an object, so to fantasizing, to other sexual sins, right? Is that where we're led? Or is it able to lend itself to the good of the beloved, right? Is the best way to put this. Is our attraction able to lend itself to a good, especially the good of the person we love? So if it's natural sexual desire, what we're able to do, again, is have that deep, authentic longing for union with the person, especially if they're our spouse, recognizing that that's a good for our marriage to this person. But lust just, again, leads us towards deeper selfishness and sinful behavior. The Summa actually says that lust is inherently selfish. So it always kind of directs itself back inward instead of allowing. Sexual desire expresses outward, right? It reaches towards another person. It tries to close the gap between person and person, or heart and heart, right? Whereas lust just kind of causes us to cave more deeply in on ourselves, which is at the root of why it's so sinful. And I think we can see when lust arises in our hearts, it comes with that certain edginess, kind of that crazed feeling. I said this in the blog post, but it creates almost like an antsiness, like we have to do something with it. We get caught, we get drowned. That's another good word to look for, are we overwhelmed? Are we drowned by our thoughts, by our feelings, where we lose self-control, that sort of thing, where it feels almost impossible to practice temperance and prudence in this area. There's an edginess to it and an overwhelming feeling to being in lust, right? But sexual desire, particularly for someone you love deeply, right, and are getting to know better and better and better, whether in a serious relationship or in a marriage, it comes with this tenderness. It's so beautiful, but it comes with this tenderness and this ache to know this person fully, right? That's ultimately what sexual desire, when it's authentic and healthy, orders itself towards, is knowing and being united to the beloved, right? Knowing them fully and allowing them to know you fully. It's this mutual exchange, right? You long to be in what John Paul II calls the reciprocal gaze, right? So you long to see this person fully as they truly are. You long for them to see you truly and fully as you are. And then you long to see each other seeing each other, right? So it's this reciprocal gaze. It's beautiful. John Paul II talks about that in his Theology of the Body. But that reciprocal gaze that we can experience, or that longing for union with the beloved, longing to be known and fully known, or longing to know and be fully known, right? And that unity, especially as it expresses itself physically, what that does is ultimately orders us towards God, right? God chose the image of man and woman in marriage to explain to the faithful what he wants with each one of us as members of the church, what he wants with the church as a whole, right? He chose bridal language for the church and for himself, like to refer to himself as bridegroom, right? And he does this in the Old Testament as well. But it's splendid to see how God's word uses like almost a sexual imagery, right? Not in the crude sense, but in a very uplifting and glorifying sense. But when we have that longing for union, when we have that natural good sexual desire that grace can easily infuse, right? Ultimately, it leads us towards that same longing that we experience in the physical and in our soul for someone we love. It leads us to that same longing for God. We long for that same complete union with God. I want to be known as I am, and I want to know God fully, right? And as the scriptures say, like in heaven we'll be known. We will know fully as we have been fully known, right? So good natural sexual desire points eschatologically, as in pointing to the end. It points to the end of ourselves, right? It points to the full union that we long for with Christ, that we receive, on earth in receiving the Eucharist, and that we can receive in sexual relationships with our spouse in a way as well. Can be an act of worship, but receiving the Eucharist is what we're able to see here on earth, but we'll experience that infinitely more fully in heaven. So I hope this has been a little bit more of an explainer of what this blog post was getting at. And I'm excited to see, further feedback on distinguishing between those two. But just kind of to close, it's so important to distinguish between lust and your healthy desires, not just for yourself, but for your recovery. Like for yourself in your relationships, but for your recovery. We cannot recover based on fear. We cannot recover when we're worried, when we are white-knuckling freedom, right? White-knuckling freedom is a contradiction, right? We cannot heal out of fear. And so letting go and allowing, again, allowing gentleness and mercy to come in how you deal with your attractions, whether they're becoming lustful or they're staying good and ordered. Allowing yourself to become gentle and receptive and almost curious even about where your attractions come from, and becoming very self-aware in this area. It's so good for your recovery and so important, because it leads you to being a more healthy sexual human being overall. Not, again, that white knuckling, that fearful, like, when will I fall next, or how can I fall again? I'm so afraid of being back where I was. That will always keep you trapped in a way, because as long as we fear a thing, it still has a claim over us, right? So we don't want to fear lust. We want to fear offending God, right? We want to have that filial fear. So we should probably do an entire episode on that. Don't fear lust, fear offending God. But kind of, I touched on this earlier, but just a practical note to end on. Don't be afraid to examine your attractions. Be curious, as I said. Become self-aware in where your attractions are coming from and what they lead you to do. But just practically speaking, if you're experiencing a sexual attraction that's becoming lustful, pray for that person. It's incredible how prayer for that person turns selfishness on its head. So cut the thoughts off with a Hail Mary and a quick prayer for that person's intentions, for any suffering they may be going through. Praise for the good qualities that you see in that person, especially if you know them well. Thank God for allowing you to meet them and encounter them. And then ask for purified intention. God shows up when we need him. He doesn't deprive us of something we need, right? So ask for the grace to cut lust off and continue to practice it. It's like building a muscle. That first time can be hard. That second time can be hard as well. Third, fourth, fifth, right? But if you continue to cultivate this habit of cutting lust off, then it becomes easier and easier. And you end up just praying for people, which is fabulous. But if you're experiencing authentic sexual desire in marriage, again, always ask for purity of intention. But don't be afraid of allowing your desire to come to the surface. Marriage is the only place where we, are allowed to fully express our sexuality in a completely physical way, right? So don't be afraid of allowing your desire to come forward. Asking again for that purification of intention, but allowing yourself to encounter your spouse out of a good and authentic desire is healthy. It's healthy and it's helpful to the sanctity of your marriage if you continually subject it to God's order. But if you're experiencing deep sexual attraction in a serious relationship or an engagement can be particularly painful in this way, right? That ache just increases and increases and increases the more you get to know this person, but you don't yet have that safe and good and ordered outlet for it. Again, pray for this person. Pray for an ordered sexual attraction towards them, an ordered desire for them. But don't be afraid, again, of that desire. It's so good and it should be increasing. The fact that it's increasing in a serious relationship is a sign that you are encountering each other more deeply and getting to know each other better, and accompanying each other on the journey towards heaven better. So don't be afraid of your attraction, but always ask for the sanctifying grace that you need to love the other person well. And particularly in serious dating relationships and engagement, I think finding multiple ways to love each other well outside of just physicality is so important. Learn to express your love in other physical ways, whether that's providing the one you love with something they need, or serving them in a particular way, or having a very, lovely conversation or something. Find other ways to express your love and focus on those expressions while asking for your sexuality to be purified. That becomes crucial in marriage as well, I think. But that's all I got. That's all I got, folks. Again, I hope this has been a good clarifier. Feel free to comment any questions or observations in the comments section. We look forward to hearing from you guys. And I will put the link to the original blog post in the show description if you want to read it. Some people are readers, some people are listeners, so some people are both. But we hope that this clarification, both on the blog and now on the podcast, have helped you distinguish between lust and good desire in your life. Because as we said on our blog post, nobody wants your desire to be more ordered than God. Nobody wants you to experience true sexual desire more than God does, because he knows that when you do, it leads you right back to him. If you like this episode, feel free to share. We'd love to have you subscribe. Click the little notification button on YouTube if you're on YouTube, because it will let you know when we post a new episode, which our current pace is every other week. So we hope you join us again at Magdala's Table. If you would like more access to exclusive content, feel free to join us on Patreon. Our patrons support us financially and through prayer, and are forming a great little community of just deeper intentionality and diving into these issues together. So if you feel so called, we'd love to have you join us on Patreon. But other than that, we will see you back here soon. God bless. Thanks for joining the conversation today on the Magdala podcast. If you want to learn more, join a support group with other women on the journey, or find more content, visit magdalaministries.org. If you want to continue to be a part of the conversation, like, subscribe, and share this podcast. But most importantly, wherever you are in the journey of healing, know that you're not alone and you don't have to hide anymore. We're excited to welcome you to the table next time. God bless.